Lattafa launched in Dubai in 1980 and now sits at somewhere around 383 individual fragrances in its catalog, with new releases arriving almost every year. That number is both the appeal and the problem. If you walk into a Middle Eastern perfume shop with no map, you will stand there for 20 minutes smelling things at random and leave with nothing useful. What this video is going to do is give you that map. Every major line, what it's built around, who it's for, what it costs, and where it fits relative to everything else the house makes. Start here, and by the end, you'll know exactly which bottle is worth your money. Lattafa is a family-run house, now in its third generation, headquartered in Sharjah in the UAE. The name itself comes from the Arabic words latif and latifa, meaning kindness and pleasantness. Founded by Sheikh Shahid Ahmad and Shuaib Iqbal, the house built its reputation on one specific idea: Khaliji-style fragrance, built around oud, amber, saffron, and rose, at prices that don't require a deliberate occasion to justify. Most of the lineup sits between $15 and $40. The concentration is almost universally Eau de Parfum or higher, which means 15 to 30% fragrance oil in the bottle. You're getting a lot of performance for that price point. The core pillar of the house is what you could call the heavy oriental stack. Rich, dense, long-lasting, built for warm, dry air and projection. Lattafa was designed for the Gulf climate, where heat pulls fragrance off the skin and disperses it differently than it does in cooler, more enclosed Western environments. That context matters. The same bottle that reads as bold but wearable outdoors in Dubai on a dry afternoon will fill a small office in Chicago in a way the wearer doesn't intend. The heavier orientals, Asad, Raghba, Oud For Glory, need space. Give them space and they perform well. Don't, and they overwhelm. Asad is the anchor of the men's side. The name means lion in Arabic, launched in 2019, retailing around $20 to $25 for 100 milliliters. Heavy oriental structure, strong sillage, oud and leather up top, amber and musk in the base, and a projection radius that gets attention in any room you walk into. This is not a subtle fragrance and doesn't intend to be. It's the bottle you wear when you want to be noticed and you're confident enough in the composition to back that up. Most people buying their first Lattafa end up here eventually, and it's a reasonable place to land if evening wear and formal occasions are your primary use case. Raghba sits just below Asad in intensity and functions as the most versatile entry point for men on the oriental side. Warm, woody, ambery, launched in 2017, available at around $15 to $20. It doesn't have Asad's density, which makes it easier to deploy across more contexts. Casual evenings, cooler autumn days, weekend wear where you want presence without formality. Reviewers and buyers consistently cite it as a safe, everyday oriental, which is accurate. It's also the fragrance most often recommended to someone transitioning from Western woody spicy colognes who wants to understand what the Arabian tradition does differently. Qaed Al Fursan is where the men's collection shifts register entirely. The name translates to Leader of the Nights. It launched in 2020, retails around $20, and it reads like a fresh, spicy Western designer fragrance filtered through Lattafa's production values. Bergamot, lavender, vetiver, cedar. For someone who grew up buying Armani or Paco Rabanne and is testing the waters with the house for the first time, Qaed Al Fursan is the clearest on-ramp. It performs above its price point on both projection and longevity, and the composition is professional enough for office wear in a way that Asad simply isn't. The significance of Qaed Al Fursan extends beyond its individual appeal. It represents Lattafa's broader strategy of creating bridges between Western fragrance traditions and Khaliji sensibilities. The house produces several fragrances in this category. Fragrances that lean toward Western structure while maintaining higher concentration and more ambitious raw materials than comparable designer releases at similar price points. This approach has been instrumental in building Lattafa's audience outside the Gulf region, particularly among younger buyers and those new to the house who lack reference points for heavy orientals. The strategy demonstrates sophistication in market positioning. Give the newcomers something familiar enough to feel comfortable, but differentiated enough in performance to justify the exploration. That confidence in gradation also appears consistently throughout the women's and unisex collections, creating multiple entry points rather than forcing every customer toward the same introductory bottle. On the women's side, Yara is the entry point. Launched in 2021, retailing around $20 for 100 milliliters, built around tangerine, orchid, vanilla, and musk. Bright, fruity, playful, the kind of fragrance that works at noon on a Saturday rather than at 10 p.m. on a Friday. It became one of the house's best-selling releases almost immediately, primarily among younger buyers who wanted something feminine and accessible that didn't default to the heavy floral oriental that dominates so much of the catalog. Yara Moi and Yara Tous are close variants worth comparing side by side. Yara Moi runs slightly softer and more powdery. Yara Tous shifts the fruit balance and picks up a little more warmth in the base. All three occupy essentially the same price tier. Fakhar is the middle ground between the full intensity of the Asad-style Oriental and something more wearable across a wider range of settings. Available in both men's and women's versions, the men's edition builds around saffron, leather, oud, and patchouli with a woody dry-down. It sits closer to a niche-adjacent composition than most of the house's entry-level offerings, with a more refined balance between the spice top and the resinous base. Price point around $20 to $30. It's one of the more underrated bottles in the catalog, partly because Asad gets most of the attention on the men's Oriental side, and Khamrah dominates the conversation on the unisex side. Khamrah is the most talked about release the house has produced in the last several years. Launched in 2022, unisex, retailing around $30 for 100 milliliters. The top notes are cinnamon, nutmeg, and bergamot. The middle builds through dates, praline, and tuberose. The base resolves into vanilla, tonka bean, myrrh, amberwood, and benzoin. That construction gives you a warm, spiced gourmand that reads rich without being cloying, provided the application is controlled. It draws consistent comparisons to Maison Francis Kurkdjian's Baccarat Rouge 540 as a structural reference point. Those comparisons are not precise. Khamrah is warmer and heavier, but they explain why the bottle resonates with buyers who have already been spending considerably more for a similar emotional register. At $30 against $325, the value argument makes itself. The Khamrah line has expanded significantly since the original release. Khamrah Kawa arrived in 2023, adding cardamom, ginger, coffee, and candied fruits to the same foundational DNA. The coffee note introduces bitterness that counterbalances the sweetness, making Kawa slightly more unisex in practice than the original. If the original reads as a dessert composition, Kawa reads as the coffee that comes after it. Khamrah Dukhan launched in 2025 and moves in a darker direction entirely. The name means smoke in Arabic, and the fragrance leans into incense, labdanum, and tobacco across the mid and base notes. It's the evening wear variant, the one with the lowest versatility but the most drama. Khamrah Waha arrived in 2026 and introduces aquatic and green elements that push the line into warm weather territory for the first time. 4 variations of a single foundational DNA, each one adjusted for a different context. Lattafa Pride is the house's premium subline. More complex compositions, higher grade raw materials, correspondingly higher prices. Most Pride releases sit between $40 and $80 depending on the expression. If you've worked through Yara, Khamrah, or Asad and want to understand what Lattafa can do with a larger budget and more room to work, the Pride collection is the logical next step. Pride Nebras and Sakina are among the most frequently cited unisex options from the line, both leaning toward floral oriental structures that wear well on either skin chemistry. The Pride releases also tend to benefit more from the house's collaborations with Western perfumers. Names like Quentin Bish, Jordi Fernandez, and Julian Rasquinet appear across several expressions, bringing an outside compositional perspective to the Khaliji-based materials. The oud-focused releases occupy their own category within the catalog. Oud For Glory is the most direct expression of what traditional Gulf oud perfumery does. At its most concentrated and uncompromising. Dark, resinous, woody, and animalic in the way that good oud compositions can be when they're not being sanitized for Western palatability. It's not an introductory fragrance. It is, however, a genuinely high-quality execution of a very traditional register at a price point, roughly $25 to $35. That makes comparable Western oud releases look almost absurd by comparison. The house also produces a range of more accessible oud blends that smooth the rougher edges of the raw material and bring amber, rose, or musk into the foreground to carry the oud as a supporting note rather than the lead. For people moving into the house from a Western designer fragrance background, the performance expectations need recalibrating before the first application. Most mid-range Western eau de parfum compositions will give you 4 to 6 hours of projection before settling close to the skin. A standard Lattafa EDP at the same price, Khamrah, Asad, Raghba, will project actively for 8 to 12 hours and leave a skin scent that lasts considerably longer. The fragrance oil concentration is simply higher, and the base materials, resins, ambers, musks, are built to fix to skin and fabric. 2 sprays is typically the right starting point. 3 is often too many in any enclosed environment. Apply, wait 30 minutes, and assess before deciding whether more is needed. The question of authenticity is worth addressing directly. Every legitimate Lattafa bottle carries a batch code on the underside of the box. Running that code through checkfresh.com will show you the production date and confirm the bottle hasn't been tampered with or refilled. The house's packaging is consistent enough that counterfeit product is relatively easy to identify. The quality of the printing, the fit of the cap, and the clarity of the juice itself are all reliable indicators. Buying from authorized retailers eliminates the issue entirely, but if you're sourcing from secondary markets, the batch code check is a 30-second step worth doing. At the accessible end of the price range, 3 bottles represent the clearest starting positions depending on what you're after. Yara if you want something light, fruity, and feminine. Qaed Al Fursan if you want something fresh, professional, and close to a Western designer register. Raghba if you want to understand what the house does with a warm, woody oriental at its most approachable. From any of those 3, the rest of the catalog maps outward in a way that starts to make sense. Asad is where you go from Raghba when you want more intensity. Khamrah is where you go when you want sweetness added to that structure. The Pride line is where you go when you want the same house working with a bigger budget and more ambition. Nearly 4 decades after the house opened in Dubai, the catalog it's dense enough to spend years exploring. You don't have to. Now, you know where to start.